for Congress in the 24th Congressional District. Dana, thanks so much for doing this evening.
Thanks for having me, Robert.
So the first place I wanted to start, we'll get right into the questions with healthcare. I know that you've been, since you ran the first time, a proponent of Medicare for all, and I know you said in a recent ad that you work with Joe Biden on healthcare. He has a different position on Medicare for all, of course. He does want progress on healthcare, but he wouldn't go that far. So I guess, to get into more detail than a 30-second ad can offer, I guess, how would you work with him on that? And how would you, compromise on that difference between the two of you?
Yeah, well, I think this is a great example of what it means to work with other people, right? Part of the job in politics is to come together with people who have different ideas and find common ground to make progress for all of us. So what I know that Joe Biden supports, what he's been talking about on the campaign trail, is the beginning of the plan that I have been talking about. As I've been talking on the trail about how we get from where we are now to the point where everybody has health insurance and health care, I've talked about moving there in stages, as you know, beginning with lowering the age of eligibility for Medicare. Well, that's a policy that Joe Biden supports, so I'm eager to work with him to get it done. I've talked about the need to offer a public buy-in, so anybody of any age who wants to participate in Medicare can. That's also a policy that Joe Biden supports, so I'm looking forward to working with him to get it done. I'm hoping that I can persuade Joe Biden and other colleagues in Congress that enrolling babies when they're born in Medicare is also a good idea. That is a way to bring new people into the system and to extend coverage to people to ensure that for the entirety of their lives, they have access to health care. So I have long talked about those as the first steps we need to take to get to universal coverage. And that overlaps beautifully with the plan that Joe Biden is advocating for. So I think that's where we begin.
And just as a follow-up, just given the election season we're in, if you look at all of the political forecasters, which I know have rated this race a toss-up, they looking at kind of the national landscape, certainly the polling right now would suggest that Joe Biden could win the presidency if the election were held today. Obviously, things can change. We learned that 4 years ago. The House, it looks like Democrats will retain control. The Senate's the big question mark. So, in terms of healthcare, if the Senate remains in Republican control and you have those other two fall into place, I guess, how can you get healthcare reform done in that environment?
Sure. So obviously, if the Republicans retain control of the Senate and Mitch McConnell is the Senate Majority Leader, healthcare is not the only thing that's in trouble. I mean, he has made it clear that he has no intention of moving the country forward on any of the issues that we care about. The Democratic-led House has passed over 400 pieces of legislation. Most of them have been bipartisan, and Mitch McConnell and the Senate have taken up barely a handful. I don't expect that would change, which is why it's really important that we win the Senate. And I think we're going to do that. All of the polling across the country shows that we have a really good chance. We're competitive in a lot of states. So I believe that that's what's going to happen. And I hope with every fiber of my being that that's what happens, because we need real progress. And again, McConnell has made it clear that he's going to stand in the way of that. I do think that there is a lot of work that the current Democratic House has done to lay the foundation for progress on healthcare. One of the bills that the House passed that I think would be of tremendous benefit for Central and Western New Yorkers is HR 3, the prescription drug package. That's a really good example of an issue that both parties say they want to work on. The Democrats put forward and passed a fantastic piece of legislation that would instantly lower drug costs by about 40% for all Americans. And John Katko, of course, voted against it. and Mitch McConnell won't take it up in the House. But there's an example of really important healthcare legislation that once we win control of Congress in this election, we'll be able to move right away. For sure, a democratically controlled House will pass that bill. For sure, a democratically controlled Senate will, and for sure, a President Joe Biden would sign it into law.
To move on to the one of the healthcare issues of our time right now, apart from the ACA and how to preserve it and strengthen it, is certainly the pandemic that we're in. And I wanted to start with the health side of this. I think the latest number, we're up to more than 215,000 people have died. Millions have contracted this virus. If you're elected, this isn't going to go away. It's still going to be a problem come January. So what types of policies will you advocate for on the health response of this to ensure that, we can really prevent the spread of this, but also hopefully stop this pandemic in its tracks?
Yeah. So this obviously is the biggest challenge that we are facing right now. And it's more than 7.5 million people who have contracted COVID. This is another reason why the fight over the Supreme Court and the ACA is so very, very important, because now those 7.5 million people all have a pre-existing condition. And what we're seeing, we still know relatively little about this virus and the course of the disease, but what we are seeing right now suggests that a lot of people who have this illness, even once they recover and they're no longer in danger of dying, they have lasting long-term effects from this, which means that they are going to need health care and they're going to be at risk for other things over the course of their lifetimes. So protecting coverage for people with pre-existing conditions is even more important, if possible, than it was a year ago. That's why we've got to hold people like John Katko and Donald Trump accountable for their efforts to sabotage the ACA and make sure that we do everything we can to protect it as we are advancing and expanding access for everyone. To deal with the virus specifically, the very clear course of action, this has been clear from the beginning, is that we need a national testing and tracing program. It is beyond explanation that Donald Trump has consistently refused to do that. Here we are, 8 months into this crisis, and we still don't have a national testing and tracing program. That is step one. That is necessary for tracking what is happening with this virus and being able to get ahead of it. We also need to make sure that everybody is wearing masks. That is the clearest, best defense that we have against it. All of the doctors and scientists tell us that, and still we have a president who refuses to encourage people to wear masks. That is a true shame. And then we need to make sure that we do everything we can to develop a safe and effective vaccine and treatments. And we've got, the best minds in the country working on this. The government is investing in it, and we need to continue to do that. We've got to make sure that what we develop and bring to market is safe, it's effective, and it's distributed equitably. We've got to make sure that the people who need vaccines the most get them first, the people who need treatments most get them first, and that we ramp up production capacity so that we can produce enough to treat all the people, to vaccinate and treat all the people who need it and really get this under control. That's why it was so important to have started this effort back in January and February, when we were first learning about the severity of this crisis. And we're now, many months behind the curve because of Donald Trump's refusal to act and his failed leadership. I hope that he changes course here in his last few months in office, but there's not really anything to suggest that he will. So I know for sure that when Joe Biden takes office in January, this will be his first priority. I hope Donald Trump decides to do something about it before then.
Just to follow up to that, before I move on to the economic effects of this, with as a candidate, when you ran in the primary election, obviously things at the time, I think the primary election was happening just at the tail end of New York's phased reopening, so your ability to hold events was pretty limited at that point. Here we are, just about 4 months later. As a candidate, how especially in a general election, because we've seen the TV ads. Obviously, the stakes in this race, seem to be quite high for both parties. So, how challenging is it in this environment with the pandemic to campaign and to continue interacting with voters?
Well, we're still not really doing public events. The few things that we have done in public have been outdoors and socially distant and with masks, and really very little of that. And we're not going door to door to talk to voters. We're doing all of our direct voter outreach virtually, by phone, by text, using Zoom and other tools like this. And it certainly does present challenges. I mean, politics is very personal, right? We're talking about the things that matter the most in people's lives, and those face-to-face conversations, being in a room with people so that they can look you in the eye and get a sense of you, and really challenge what you have to say and ask their questions and demand answers. That's a really valuable part of the campaign process and the democratic process. It's also, from my perspective, the most fun part. And so I really miss it. But of course, public safety and the safety of our volunteers and our campaign staff and all of the voters is the primary concern. So we're not going to do anything that puts people at risk. I've said before that I think we've had some unexpected benefits of using these tools. There are lots of folks who won't come out to a political event on a Tuesday night at the local library, either because they're not sure they're interested, or because they don't have transportation to get there, or they don't have somebody to watch the kids while they're gone. And doing things remotely gives us the opportunity to bring those events and those conversations right into somebody's living room. So it gives access to people who wouldn't necessarily engage otherwise. And that's been a really exciting part of this new kind of campaigning. And I think, I know I certainly will keep using tools like this to try to continue expanding the reach of the campaign process and engaging more people. But I'm definitely looking forward to the time when we can get back to shaking hands and going to the Apple Blossom Festival and all the other great public events. It's a special part of the process.
With the economic crisis, really, that we're in as a result of the pandemic, I think as this goes on, while there are a few encouraging signs, obviously there are people that have been able to get their jobs back. There's still millions of Americans who are out of work, and there are businesses that permanently close because of this, or they're still temporarily closed. They hope to reopen, but there's also businesses that reopen that are obviously not having the same crowds that they had before, and are struggling. So with all of these things, I guess, what more do you think the federal government needs to do to respond to this economic crisis as a result of the pandemic?
Well, there's a lot we need to do. You rightly point out there's been a lot of permanent damage. More than 100,000 businesses have closed permanently. Those are businesses, many of them family businesses, that are not coming back. And I've talked to countless people right here in our district who have faced the really hard choice of closing down family businesses that they've had, in some cases for generations, because they can't survive in this economic climate. And that's a real, it's a real tragedy. We also see lots of businesses, small businesses in the area that are just struggling to hang on, and they're clinging with everything that they've got. And we need to step in and provide support to help. There have been some things that have come through Congress and made it to our community that have been really helpful. In the first relief bill, the Paycheck Protection Program is one example. There was also a good loan program for businesses, and that really helped people survive the initial phase of this crisis. But it's not nearly enough. And we know that there were a lot of problems with that. We know that a lot of large businesses that didn't need that support got it, and a lot of the small businesses in our community who did need it didn't get it. So as we're going forward, we've got to make tweaks to those programs. We need to do another round of Paycheck Protection Program funding and fix those problems in the program. But we also have to think beyond that. I have been working with Congressman Earl Blumenauer in Oregon, who was the lead author of a new piece of legislation called the Restaurants Act. And this is a piece of legislation designed to help businesses that sell food and drink to the public. And they have been hit particularly hard because, as you mentioned, the crowds are gone. Right? People can't come and patronize businesses in the same way that they did before. And so the restaurant industry and other food and beverage businesses have been hit extremely hard. And without intervention, the estimate is that about 85% will close permanently because of this crisis. So this bill goes a lot farther than the Paycheck Protection Program did. This provides $120 billion in grant funding that does not have to be paid back to small independent restaurants and food and beverage businesses to help them pay for any and all of their operating costs. So it's not limited to payroll. They can use it for debt service and any equipment that they need, whatever it takes to keep the business running. And that's the kind of legislation I think we need to be thinking about going forward, because business owners need more flexibility in what those funds can be used for. We've got to make sure we help them get through. That's one example of the kind of thing I think we should be doing, and I will work on in Congress.
I wanted to ask you too about racial justice, because certainly in the we talked about this when we did one of these leading up to the primary election. This was at the time, it was just really in the weeks after what we saw in Minneapolis with a police officer there kneeling and killing, kneeling on and killing George Floyd, and the subsequent demonstrations that we saw and the calls for change. As Central New York's Congresswoman, what will you do in this area to achieve that? Because certainly this covers a lot of, it's not just policing. I think a lot of people, focus on that part of it, but certainly it covers everything from education to housing, and really, every facet of our government. So
right.
How do we address that? What's, as the congressional representative, what will you advocate for to achieve racial justice?
Well, I think the first thing is what you're getting at in the question, the idea that this is not relevant to an isolated area of policy, that the issue of racial justice or racial injustice, as we currently have, transcends all areas of policy and every level of government. And the reason for that is that this country was founded in slavery and white supremacy. That's how it was built. And so it makes sense that we have a legacy that has flowed from that throughout the generations. It's changed in what it's looked like. It's changed in the tools that have been used by government to further those ends, but it's persisted. And so if we are serious about achieving racial justice, we have to first of all acknowledge that. And then we have to make a commitment, and this is my commitment, what I intend to do as an elected representative, is to make sure that we use the lens of racial justice to examine every area of policy. So whether we're talking about housing or transportation or education or healthcare, we are thinking about what are the racial disparities that exist in this policy area, and how are we going to correct for those? How are we going to move forward in a way that promotes and achieves racial justice? In the area of the criminal legal system, of course, there is a lot of work to do. Policing is only one piece of that, and I have talked about some of the things that I support. I think the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act that the House passed earlier this year was a really good start. Worth noting that Congressman Katko voted against that bill. We need to have a national use of force policy and ban chokeholds, so things like what happened to George Floyd cannot happen anymore. We need to stop giving excess military equipment to our police departments, because no local department needs a tank. We need to make sure that there's a national registry of police misconduct. So if and when a police officer is fired for misconduct or abuse, that officer can't just go get a job at another department. We need to be able to keep track of these things. We need transparency, and we need accountability. And those are things we can work on at the federal level. But as you said, that's just one piece of it, right? So we have to make sure that we stop disproportionately poisoning Black and Brown communities. We've got to think about environmental justice. One of the travesties of I-81 being run through the 15th Ward in the city of Syracuse is that that highway ran through what was the thriving heart of the African American community. And as a result, rates of asthma among Black and Brown children in the city far outpace rates of asthma among white children. Those are the kinds of effects that policy can have if we don't keep racial justice goals in mind. So I have a long agenda. It would take us 2 hours just talking about that to cover all of the pieces that I want to deal with in Congress. But I think that gives you a sense of how I think about this and how I will approach it, and how seriously we need to take it.
To the question about public safety, because certainly a lot of these elements are incorporated in that discussion as well. But also we see what's happening now, in certain parts of the country, there are increased crime rates. We've seen, major crimes like murders increase as well. It's tough to get a gauge on why that is. It could be because of the pandemic. People are out of work. We have seen in the past when there's, high unemployment that's a factor in crimes. So, with this, what's from the federal government standpoint, again, if you're elected to Congress, how do you address that problem and help the state and local governments address that as well?
Yeah. So there's a few things that I think are important in this conversation. One is, what do we mean when we say public safety, and how do we think about, as a government, providing safety to ensure that our communities are safe? The other is we can't solve a problem when we don't know what's causing a problem. And so we have to be thoughtful about what the causes are. And I get concerned when I hear elected leaders or candidates making claims about very clear causes. We took this action and then crime rose, and so clearly that's the cause. There is a lot of research that has been done into the causes of crime, and we need to make sure that we're relying on good information. And some of the things that we know about what drive crime rates are lack of economic opportunity, lack of educational resources, and high need, right? Need in terms of healthcare, need in terms of housing, need in terms of food security. And so one of the things, if we are thinking about reducing crime from the broad perspective of trying to bring down crime rates, one of the things that we need to do is make sure that people are experiencing security in all of those areas. And I think when we are able to look back at research on this period of time, which will take a few years before we get it, I think what we are likely to see is that the circumstances of the pandemic, which have led to so many people being out of work, so many people being food and housing insecure, and so many people being economically insecure, I think we'll find that that was the main driving factor to the increase in crime. And that is certainly something that we can address. That's, again, goes back to the COVID relief items that we were talking about before, but it also goes to the larger picture of how do we ensure that there's economic opportunity for everybody. This is why we need to raise the minimum wage. This is why we need to make sure that we strengthen unions and have real worker protections so that everybody has the opportunity to participate in a strong, healthy economy where they can secure a good standard of living for themselves and their families. It's why we've got to make sure that we have healthcare access for everybody. It's why we've got to make sure that everybody has access to good, healthy food, which, despite the fact that we're the richest country in the history of the world, we still haven't achieved. There are lots of people right here in our own communities who live in food deserts, who don't have access to a grocery store near them where they can buy fruits and vegetables and things that are healthy to sustain their kids and their families. So we have to think about it in that really comprehensive way. And then we also have to think about the specific challenges that we face in our communities that make us less safe, which include crime, it includes domestic violence, it includes substance abuse disorder. It includes a lot of mental health challenges that go untreated. And so we've got to invest in the resources necessary to address those challenges. That means making sure that our police departments are well funded and well resourced, and that our officers are well trained. It means making sure that nonprofit organizations who work in our community, as well as government agencies who provide services in our communities, are well staffed and well resourced so that they can address the problems that they know how to deal with. All of that is part of the larger public safety picture. And I think that we're in a moment right now where we're recognizing the need to invest more. And so we've just got to make sure that we do that. And as a member of Congress, it's something that I will work on.
And to close, I know we've talked before about the tax law that was passed in 2017, signed by President Trump. This is something that Congressman Caco did support. I know that you've been on record
Still
saying
does.
that. Yep. And I know you've been on record saying that you want to get rid of that and replace it with a different form of tax reform. To get to that question, what do you replace it with? Because that covers not just income taxes, which affects it's supposed to affect everybody, but then with corporate tax rates too. This affects a great many businesses. But also, even with this law, we know that there are still a great many loopholes, and there's companies and individuals that certainly take advantage of those. So how do you achieve this reform in a way that you think is better for individual filers, obviously, and businesses, but also address those loopholes that still exist as well?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of two pieces to this, right? But the what guides it all is, what are your priorities? How do you prioritize the who do you prioritize, I should say, who do you prioritize in tax policy? And what the 2017 bill did very clearly is prioritize millionaires, billionaires, and large corporations. There is absolutely no dispute about that, though Congressman Katko will argue it till he's blue in the face. All of the reliable analysis shows that the vast majority of the benefits of that bill go to millionaires, billionaires, and corporations. What I want to do is prioritize working families, the people, seniors, students, veterans, people with disabilities, everyday folks who need a little bit of a boost to make their lives just a little bit easier, instead of reprioritizing the folks who already have everything that they need. And what that looks like in terms of concrete policy is it means making sure that the wealthy pay their fair share, raising corporate taxes, raising taxes on the wealthy. And we should be really clear about who that is, right? So we have heard Joe Biden say over and over again, he will not raise taxes on anybody making less than $400,000 a year. I'm talking about the people at the top of the economic ladder, right? You mentioned loopholes. There were giant giveaways in that tax bill, plus loopholes on top of it. And as a result, something like, I believe it was 91 of the Fortune 500 companies in this country paid $0 in federal income taxes. Think about that. I talked to a woman here in Syracuse who had to clear out 3 savings accounts to pay her tax bill last year. That's how much her taxes went up. But Amazon, the richest company in the world, got a tax refund. That's just not right. It is not fair, and it's not good public policy. We need to be giving relief to working families with things like increasing the child tax credit and offering a tax credit for buying a home. Those kinds of policies help real everyday folks who are struggling to make ends meet, make their lives just a little bit easier. And at the same time, if we increase taxes on the wealthy and on corporations, we will be able to raise the revenue that we need to do things for everyday folks, like invest in education, like invest in infrastructure, like invest in healthcare. And that is how we make society better for everybody.
And then just as a, kind of our signing off here, what's your message? There aren't a lot of voters, I don't think, who are undecided, but certainly they're out there. In this environment that we find ourselves in, people have already voted by absentee. Early voting starts on October 24th. So what's your message to the undecided voters out there as to why they should choose you, whether they vote early or vote on election day?
Well, first of all, make sure you vote. This is your chance to make your voice heard and demand the government you deserve. So please do it. I hope that you vote for me. I think the choice in this election is very clear. You have 2 people asking for your support, asking you to put your trust in them to fight for you. On the one side, we have Congressman Katko, who has been in office for almost 6 years and hasn't done anything to make healthcare more affordable or more accessible, has consistently voted in the interests of his corporate donors and the wealthiest people in this country. The tax bill that we were just talking about is a prime example. We need somebody in Congress who is going to fight for us. John Katko has chosen his side, and he has chosen Donald Trump instead of Central and Western New Yorkers. He supports Donald Trump's agenda, from the trade war that has devastated our farmers across this district to the tax bill that has enriched the already wealthy and left the rest of us behind. And he consistently refuses to stand up to Donald Trump and hold him accountable for the division, the hatred, the fear that he stokes, for his attacks on democracy. We are better than that as a country, and we deserve better from our representatives. On the other hand, you have me. I will go to Congress and be a tireless champion for what is best for the people of Central and Western New York. That is my top priority. And that means access to healthcare. It means economic opportunity for everybody. It means ridding our political system of the influence of money so that our government represents us instead of the already powerful corporations and wealthy families in this country. And the reason you know that you can trust me to fight for you is that I share your experiences. My story is your story. I know what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck. I know what it's like to have a pre-existing condition and not be able to find health insurance because of it, to be sick and watch the medical debt rise without having income or knowing how you're going to tackle that debt. I know what those challenges are, and nobody should have to face them. And that is why I want to serve you in Congress, because I have ideas, I have plans about how we can tackle those problems and make sure that going forward, we don't have those kinds of insurmountable challenges. And instead, we have a community that is filled with prosperity and security that we all get to share in. So I hope that you will vote for me, whether you do it from home, or you do it in person early, or you do it in person on election day. Make sure you vote.
And just as a reminder, you can still request an absentee ballot application to vote by absentee. That you can choose as a temporary illness, COVID-19. That's how they word it, but it's the risk of contracting it that is the main focus there. Or you can vote early. October 21st through November 1st is the early voting window. And then, of course, Election Day, November 3rd. So Dana Balter, Democratic candidate for Congress in the 24th District. Thanks so much again for joining me this evening.
Thanks for having me, Robert. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.